So yeah, let's talk about ethics in general today. We're going to get there eventually. Okay? But first, I just want to talk about arguments. So, like, what makes a good argument? How can I argue well? Because we're learning to critically think better in this class. And so how can we critically assess somebody's argument, either the one I'm about to make to somebody else, like I want to convince you of something, like how can I tell that my argument is a good one? How can I make sure that you're going to believe me? Or also, maybe somebody is arguing at you. How can you tell if it's a good argument or a bad one? How do you know if it's worth listening to them, right? So there are some ground rules, right? If you say, like, if somebody's arguing at you and you disagree, there's something wrong with their argument. You can't just tell them they're wrong and walk away, because that's not a good counter argument, right? You have to, if you're going to bash down somebody else's argument, you have to do it in a valid way. You have to give what's called a counter argument, right? You have to tell them exactly why they're wrong, so you guys can go back and forth and eventually figure out who's really right, okay? And so there's a bunch of things that could create a counter argument, but one thing that you can talk about, one thing that you can bash down in your opponent's argument is the assumptions that it's making. So maybe your opponent is assuming some weird things that don't really make sense, and that will help you win. Right? So I think we know what assumption means, but here's just some silly examples. So an assumption in an argument is just like what is being taken for granted, what is not being explicitly talked about, but like it's the backbone of the argument still. Okay. So here's some silly examples. Like if you buy a birthday candle, you're not going to sue the manufacturer when you try to light it underwater for your pool-themed birthday, right? So that's an assumption of the manufacturer. Surely I'm not going to light my birthday candle underwater because it won't work. I would lose the lawsuit if I tried to sue the birthday candle manufacturers for that. So that's an assumption, right? Another example, let's say that I make a dinner reservation at a restaurant. What's the assumptions there, right? There's a reason that reservations exist. The assumption of the restaurant is like, okay, this dude is going to show up and pay us lots of money and give us big tips and stuff like that, right? So that's how the world works. So there's implicit assumptions when we make reservations even, right? So that's the thing. And then here's my last silliest example. Let's say that I go stand outside in the little bus loop, or not the bus loop, but like the roundabout, and like I hold up a sign saying that I support a ban on parakeets running for office in the U.S. And like I'm just chatting with my sign out there. You can see me through this window maybe. There's plenty of assumptions that you might have, right? Watching me look silly like that. So maybe some possible assumptions, right? You have to figure out which is the right one. Maybe it's just like I've gone insane that day. That's definitely valid. If I go out and I start yelling things about parakeets, that's fine. Or maybe a parakeet has wronged me in the past. Like here are all the options. Those are assumptions, right? What's going on behind my standing out there? Okay. And then if you still think I'm sane, probably the last logical assumption would be then there must be some weird law that doesn't disallow parakeets running for office, and he just wants to fill that gap for some reason, okay? So otherwise, he wouldn't be standing outside, right, if he was sane. It's like those are valid arguments. Those are valid assumptions to me doing that. Does that kind of make sense? Any questions about that? So like when things happen, when you say things, when you talk to people, like there's assumptions deep down that it's important to think about that, to understand, all right? So here is an example that I stole from the internet, and I'd like you to go to the buy clicker page, please. I will stop attendance after we've done this buy clicker example, so please go do attendance too if you haven't yet. But I'll get it started, and then what I want you to do is I'll read it, and then I'll let you do it. Let me explain it first. So here's your question, all right? Here's an argument. Senator Franklin, there's two parts, right? Two parts of the argument, 2 bullets in total. Senator Franklin is a member of the Orange Party, which apparently supports increased military spending by the federal government. So that's fact 1, all right? And then the argument from that fact is that Franklin will surely vote for a cut in spending on social programs, right? So that's an argument, okay? Somebody's arguing something. Those are the 2 bullets that make up the argument. And here's my question for you. Please get into little mini groups with the people sitting next to you and discuss the answer. Assume that only one of these answers is the right answer. There might, in the real world, there might be others, but assume that A through E are the only valid options. Which one is the right assumption for this argument, all right? The argument assumes which of the following, all right? A through E. So give them a read with the people sitting next to you. Say hello. And please enter in your answer, and then also don't forget to do attendance because I'll stop it after this. What's the right assumption going on here? Right? Please talk to each other, convince your neighbors that you're correct. Talk to each other right now. Talk to over there, and then maybe you can like turn around and discuss with this group. Make you wake up this morning. Some good words. Keep going. Was that enough time? Seems like our conversations have died down. We've all got an answer in on the pie clicker page. All right. Well, let's see. Let's see what we're thinking. Whee! Look at us. All right, we seem to have a majority thinking B, and then a couple of us said C or E, though. Let's see. Let me check the answer. I do believe that B is the correct answer. So those of you who chose that one, very, very nice. Good work. Well, let's talk about it. Would any group, any brave group, like to explain why they picked B over any others? Yeah. Right. Mm-hmm. Sorry. Set a timer just in case we didn't finish. Keep going. Sorry. Good. Got that give and take there, that link. Yeah, does that make sense to everybody? Did we hear what was said? So let's try to cross out the other ones. Yeah, exactly. And it gives like it makes sense why this was said first also now, right? So there's like a link between these two. Like this is part of the argument technically, right? It's these two bullets are together. Like Senator Franklin is a member of the Orange Party, which does all this, supports increased military spending. That's like fact one. And then this is really the argument down here, right? That's like this is like giving firepower towards this. This is what somebody's arguing. Somebody's claiming this. Franklin will surely vote for a cut in spending on social programs. And so the right assumption somehow links these two. Does that kind of make sense? Because otherwise, like, why did you say this if it didn't link it? So let's try to cross out the other ones. Like A is not going to work. Let's see why. Elected officials always support policies endorsed by their parties. So if that is the right assumption, then all we could conclude from this argument, like we know that Franklin supports increased military spending, right? Like if this was the right assumption, then we could conclude only that he will vote for increased military spending, right? Nothing to do with social programs. Does that make sense? There's no link right now. Like if this is the right assumption, then the argument better be involving military spending, because otherwise there's nothing to talk about. Okay, does that kind of make sense? That's what his party endorses. It says nothing about social programs. There's supposed to be a link here, right? So that one won't work. For a similar reason, I think none of us chose D either. Can anybody tell me why D was crossed off your list? Why did that one not make sense? Doesn't say anything about Senate? What is that? Oh, that's true. That's true. But maybe that could be background information. Maybe assume that was true. Would the argument make sense then? I don't think so, right? Because if you have majority in the Senate, that just means you can get your bills passed, right? It says nothing about social programs still. Does that make sense? It's not actually giving meaning to the argument. So that one won't work. And then let's talk about C and E. Those ones won't work either. So if this were the right assumption, where does it go wrong? If Senator Franklin agrees with the policies of his party, again, it has the same problem as A, right? If he agrees with the policies of his party, then all we know is that he will vote for increased military spending, right? It has nothing to do with social programs still. There's still no link between those bullets. We get that? So that one we got to cross off because of that, okay? I hope that makes sense. And then finally, E. E's looking real good, actually, right? E, it's kind of like a battle between B and E. Can anybody formulate, somebody I haven't heard from, can you formulate why B is the better choice rather than E? Because E kind of makes this one make sense, doesn't it? Why is B still better? Yeah.
Because E would be a reaction to being against social programs. Where B is since he agrees with the increased military spending, he would decide to cut spending on social programs.
Good. It's if this, then that. Good. That's exactly right. And then another reason why E would not be a great idea is because, if E was the assumption, if E was the right answer here, then there was no need for this part at all, right? You should have just come out and said, all right, he opposes it, therefore he's going to vote on it. There's no need for any background information, yeah? It has to do with different stuff. Does that kind of make sense? It's not really, there's no reason to even say this if we just already knew he was going to vote for cutting spending on social programs. If we knew that, this didn't need to be part of the argument, okay? But because we have that, it better be used somehow, all right? And that's what B gives us. B tells us, all right, the only way to increase military spending by the federal government is to cut spending on social programs, right? So this bullet is about increased military spending. This bullet is about social programs. Here's finally the link between the two. Now we have a reason for us hearing this first. Why that's part of the argument. It's giving firepower this. This links the two. Does that kind of make sense? That's going to be the answer. That's the secret there. Any questions about that? It is a little subtle. E is close. E gets us most of the way there, but B is the best answer. All right. So yeah, just yell at me if you have any more questions about that stuff. But I want to talk a little bit more about ethics now. You're masters of ethics now that you wrote your little mini essay, right? So let's talk about ethics again. It's just the study of right and wrong. Yeah. There's plenty of questions we could ask in that field. So just like the question of would you steal to feed your family? Would you kill one person if it saves 50 others? There's no right answer to any of those questions, as I'm sure you figured out when you were writing stuff about it. So how do you formulate an answer to those questions? And if there is no right answer, how do I come up with the answer that's right for me? All right. And then how do you argue that your answer is right to other people who may not agree with you? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you some lenses today with which to look at the problems, to look at these unsolvable ethical problems, and that will help you check some boxes and figure out what's right for you, all right? And help you on essays and stuff like that. So I'll give you some ways that people tend to think about problems, some ways that they look at the problems, and they'll use those, and you can use those too, to figure out if something is ethical or good or right in the world, okay? I do want to stop first by saying that, I'm going to give you a bunch of essays and you're going to argue stuff, all right? I do want to say that I am going to be very impartial, Okay, so like because I'm going to give you essay questions like the one I did that have no right answer, there's nothing to do with, there's no need to get the right answer or think about it that way in the writing assignments, right? There is no idea of getting the right answer in most writing assignments in this class. Instead, right, you're formulating an argument, and I just want you to learn how to argue well in this class. That's all I really want. There is no right answer, okay? There's no need to think of it that way. And I'll talk to you more and more throughout the semester on what it means to make a good argument. And so that's the first thing I want to say. Don't feel like you need to like spit my opinions out, because I'm going to do my best to not even tell you my opinions. And then, yeah, along those lines, my opinions on whatever topic I give you an essay on, they don't matter at all. Right? I will give you an A, even if you argue the exact opposite thing I believe. I'll do my best to not tell you what I believe, but there are certain situations where it's very apparent, sorry. But that is my promise to you, okay? I will give you full credit, even if you say something that is in direct conflict with something I believe. All right? That is my promise to you, as long as you argue your point well. Okay? That's my goal. So there's that. And yeah, I'll just try to be as impartial as possible, because I want to help you see both sides of all the problems we talk about. All right? That's the goal, is to like look at it, zoom out on the problem, and see it from both sides. Because then you could, like, once you've picked your own side, maybe you can like hopefully see what the other side's thinking and like get in their mind a little bit, and then that will help you bash their ideas down. Right? So yeah, I think I wanted to say that first. Now you know. But yeah, let's keep on trucking with ethical dilemmas. So like, what is ethics? It's just the study of like doing the right thing. Right? Let's figure out what's the best thing to do in a certain situation. All right. There's a few different kinds of ethical theories, some lenses that people like to look at ethical problems with that help them, and I'll teach you a couple of them in this class. I'll teach you these two. All right. So there's two main kinds that we will talk about. You got your deontological ethical theories. That's a fun word that I would never have learned had I not taught this class. But this word, what it means is that it comes from a root. I forget if it's Latin or Greek, but it means duty. Kind of sounds like duty at the start. Okay, so it stems from like what these theories have to do with, like what must I always do, essentially. The word always will come up a lot. Like in a deontological ethical theory, like no matter what, rules are rules. You cannot disobey them. You have to always follow whatever rule you set out to give, whatever rule you decide this problem needs to be solved with. All right, so the word always will come up a lot in deontological theories. I'll show you one good one. And then there's also a theory called utilitarianism, which maybe we've learned about in like a history class or something like that. So utilitarianism comes from the root utility, right? So you consider the utility of your actions. How much good is it if I do thing A versus not doing thing A? Like, I need to weigh the world, essentially. Like, how good is it if I do the thing? How good is it if I don't do the thing? Which way tips the balance? Okay? How much good, pleasure, happiness can this thing produce if I do it? All right, so those are different synonyms for utility. Okay? So those are two of them. There's more than just those. Like, again, maybe in like a history class you read about like Locke and Hobbes and all those people that believed in natural rights, stuff like that. So that's where those are ethical theories, actually. And so that's where people believe, like, okay, we have a bunch of rights just by being humans, and nobody can infringe on those rights. And like that goes into your core beliefs, and like that helps you argue your point. But those are also ethical theories, but I'll just talk about these two in this class. There's plenty more, though, if you're interested. I encourage you to take a philosophy class if you like the ideas that we talked about today. And yeah, again, I'm giving you lenses. All of these are lenses. They are, again, not going to tell you the right answer. They're just going to help you think about the problem. All right? Don't like take them as fact. You just think about all of them together. They can all be equally valid or not, or invalid. You can combine some thoughts from this one, some thoughts from that one into your argument, or like bash down these guys, prop up these guys, whatever you want. Okay? These are just lenses, but they're going to help us think about the problems. All right? So yeah, let me teach you your first. This is a deontological theory. It's called Kantianism. All right, it's named after a dude. His last name was Kant. Immanuel Kant was his name, and he was a philosopher, and he came up with this philosophy of Kantianism, named after himself. And so it's a deontological ethical theory. That's a mouthful. And what it means, again, is that in this theory, a rule's a rule. You have to follow all of the rules. Always. You get no special exceptions. All right? So always is a very, very important word for Kantianism. And so here's what Kant believed. Here's how he thought about every ethical dilemma. All right? He thought that you should follow the golden rule, first of all, that you should act in a way that you would want others to always act. Okay? If you have a dilemma in front of you, think about how you would want everyone else in the world to think about that dilemma, and you follow along in that way. All right? Act in a way you would want others to always act, so the golden rule. And you also get no special exceptions for yourself. If everybody else is supposed to act in a certain way, you never get to break that rule yourself. Okay? That's what Kant thought. There should always be one way to do things, and everybody should always follow that way. And then also, he thought that, he tried to argue that these two bullets meant the same thing, actually. And then he also thought that, like, you shouldn't treat humans as like a means to an end, a way of getting something that you want. All right? You should treat them as humans with their own goals and values, and you should try to be nice to them. Okay? So again, it kind of comes back to the golden rule. So that is Kantianism. There are some issues with Kantianism, right? That all of these ethical theories are not like set in stone. They're just ways of approaching a problem. There's a huge glaring problem with Kantianism, and that's the fact that you get no exceptions. I'll give you a silly example in a couple slides. But Kantianism can break down, but that's okay. It's just a way of looking at a problem. Okay, so I'll show that to you, but it's useful. There are a bunch of terms first before I get to that silly example. So let's talk about them. All right. So Kant was the dude's last name. His name was Immanuel Kant. Right. That's a noun. That's his name. Kantianism is his style of thinking. All right. His philosophy. That's Kantianism, named after him. Another noun. And then Kantian is an adjective. You describe something like that's a Kantian thought. That's a Kantian argument. Okay. That's your adjective. Stuff about him. And then a Kantianist is somebody who is a proponent, who likes Kantianism. Okay? So that's how you keep all the terms straight. I'll just come back to this slide. Okay? So with that, let's go back to him. So like these were his beliefs. Let's apply them to a problem. A good example is lying. All right? So lying is an ethical dilemma. Like, should people lie? Kant would say absolutely not. Right? Because he's going to ask the question, all right, what should everybody else always do in terms of lying? Should they lie or should they never lie? And he's going to say, no one should ever lie. Therefore, I can't ever lie. Does that make sense? That's how he would use his theory to make a decision. So that's what he would say. Kant would absolutely be opposed to lying because he would never want anybody to lie to him. Therefore, that's what everybody should do. Everyone should just never lie. Right? Because he'd ask this kind of question that involves the word always. Should everyone always lie? No. Everybody should always never lie, essentially. Okay? So that's what Kant would think about lying. But I saw a silly example on the internet where like that broke down. Because you get no special exceptions, there's sometimes times when you want to lie, right? If you have kids, for example, with Santa or something like that, like you want to lie in that situation. Santa's real for sure. Here's another silly example that I stole from the internet. So Kantianism doesn't tell you the right answer always. It just gives you a way of viewing the problem. So here's a house. So the silly example of Kantianism breaking down on the internet I saw was this. So let's say that here I am in my house, and here is a murderer out to kill me, and he comes and he knocks on my door. All right, comes and knocks on the door, and let's say that I live at home and my mom answers. All right, and so the murderer says, "I'm here to kill Lawton." All right, he just says that. It's nice that he's just getting the facts straight at the beginning. I'm here to kill Lawton. Where is he? All right. If you were my mom, would you lie? Would you say he's on vacation? He's nowhere near here, even though I'm in the house. I'm here to kill Lawton. Where is he? Does that make sense, right? Kantianism would say you should never lie. So, all right, if you were a proponent of Kantianism, if you're a Kantianist, you're my mom and she was a Kantianist, she would say, oh yeah, he's in the house. Does that make sense? That doesn't also make sense at the same time, right? So Kantianism doesn't always give you the right answer, but it gives you a way of approaching the problem. But technically, there's a way. Technically, there's a thought that would still make it so that Kantianism is correct here. So yeah, this is just from a fun video that thinks about these things. So if my mom had lied, there is a way that this would still backfire, right? He's outside. What if like I overheard their conversation at the door before that. Like I heard the murder, and then I ran out the window. Now my mom, by lying, has now killed me, right? Because I just ran outside, and I really am outside now. So yeah, you can get into trouble by telling the truth at the same time, I guess, is the idea there. And then the murderer comes around, and now I'm dead. Okay, so Kantianism doesn't tell you the right answer. It's just a way of approaching the problem. That's what our ethical theories are all about. It does make sense to use this argument, though, right? It's like, it makes sense to say, like, yeah, no one should ever lie. That makes sense. That's what I should think about as a human. That's what I should follow those rules always. Any questions about this? That's Kantianism, right? Just like act in a way you'd want others to always act. Ask the question, like, should this always happen? Should it never happen? Right? That's Kantianism. Let's next talk about utilitarianism. It's like the flip side of Kantianism, right? There are a bunch of proponents over time of utilitarianism. A big one was a man named John Stuart Mill. And utilitarianism is, again, all about utility. That's part of the word, right? Almost all there. Where you think about somebody gives you an ethical dilemma like lying or something, instead of saying, like, what should somebody always do, you focus on, like, the ends justifying the means in utilitarianism. It's focus on the consequences. Like, what happens if I do the thing? What happens if I don't do the thing? So, like, there's a scale. There's a balance involved. It's like, all right, do I do the thing? Do I not do the thing? And you figure out which side is heavier, essentially. Okay, so yeah, you measure like what you're about to do in terms of utility, in terms of like happiness, pleasure, goodness that those actions would create. All right, so that is also interesting. You also get no exceptions for utilitarianism because you're trying to weigh the world. All right, say that you're trying to decide whether you want to lie or not to lie, something like that. You don't want to measure like, what is my gain versus my loss by lying or not lying? You have to measure the entire universe's gain and the entire universe's loss by trying both sides. Does that make sense? You want to produce the greatest good for the greatest number, right? Or happiness or pleasure. You want to produce the greatest good for the greatest number. You are not special still in utilitarianism. Does that make sense? You have to weigh the universe under your ideas, all right? You don't get any exceptions. You are not special at all in utilitarianism. Okay? So you don't matter any more than other people. You have to weigh everybody equally in utilitarianism. Right? And there's plenty of problems with utilitarianism too, just like there's some issues with Kantianism. So there's no one-stop shop for the right answer. But again, it's a way of looking at the problem and thinking through your own reasons. Right? So some of the problems with utilitarianism is like, it's really hard to like weigh the world. Like if I do this thing, if I lie right now, like what's going to happen to the universe essentially? How much good versus bad will come about from me lying right now? You got like the butterfly effect going on there. It's really hard to do that measurement, right? And then also sometimes there are people who are more important than others, and like just you would want to save your family, right, versus somebody else, something like that. So in utilitarianism, that does not matter at all. Okay. Any questions about that? Does that kind of make sense? All right, so greatest good for the greatest number, and a great example of that is the trolley problem that I gave you before. Like you got some people, you got one person on one line of tracks, and there's a train coming at them. That's the way the train is coming at like 50 people on the tracks, but you could divert it to a track where there's only one person tied to the rails. All right, so in utilitarianism, that's a very easy choice to make. Would you flip the switch to like make the train divert and just kill the one person? It's a very easy answer for utilitarianism because you just weigh like, all right, what's the best thing to do? What produces the greatest good for the greatest number? It's like, all right, 50 lives are way better than one life. All right, I'm going to have blood on my hands. Let's go. Let's save the 50 and kill the one. Just problem solved as far as the utilitarians are concerned. Okay? But you can imagine, like, there are plenty of reasons why that might not be the right way to go. Like, maybe the 50 people weren't part of your family, but the one person was, right? You would weigh them more heavily in your mind. I know I would. So there's that. And then, like, it's also very hard to, like, measure how important to life is. Like, maybe that one person, we didn't know it, but, like, there's some scientist who is about to cure cancer if we just let him live until tomorrow or something. Okay? So again, it's hard to do that measurement, but you just try your best essentially, and that's one way to look at the problem again. All right? Questions about that? Again, there's no right answer. There's no right answer. These are all just lenses to look through at the problem and see what's like, what are my options right now for arguing my point? Because you, deep down, usually you have something you believe in and you're trying to look for reasons, all right? So, all right, so yeah, these are just ways to approach the problem, think about it, and like get the debate going. Like, all right, Kant would say this, John Stuart Mill would say this. What makes most sense to me? Something like that, okay? If we're good, so we got Kantianism, we've got utilitarianism. Those are the main ones I want to talk about in this class. If you got the textbook, there are more that it talks about, and you can think about those too. But those are the main ones. There are two competing sides of the coin, essentially. And if we are good, I would like to apply those ethical theories to a topic near and dear to my heart. I'm a millennial, so you're going to let me do this and enjoy myself. So let's talk about the ethics of the Pokemon world. All right, we're going to ask some ethical questions of ourselves. So first of all, if you're not a millennial and you've never heard of Pokemon, let me just give you like a 30-second rundown of what Pokemon is all about. So in the Pokemon universe, there are a bunch of little, essentially sentient beings that you can catch, make part of your team, force to fight other small sentient beings, and then like there's ways to level up in the world. Like there's levels for all the Pokemon. Like there's gyms to go and battle people at, and like you gain prestige by beating people with. You're essentially sending your animals to beat up other people's animals, right? So there are ethical dilemmas in Pokemon, right? That's interesting. And then like there's the dream of the main character in like the anime to become the master of the Pokemon world and beat every other Pokemon trainer. So that's Pokemon in a nutshell. Hopefully you've heard of it. But let's think about the Pokemon world using Kantianism and using utilitarianism. These are just silly examples, all right? So, okay. If we were going to analyze, like, is it okay to catch Pokemon or something like that, we could think about it in terms of Kantianism, right? And when you hear the word Kantianism, you should always think always. So the word always should come up in your mind when you hear the word Kantianism, okay? Because that's what he would ask. He would ask a question like, all right, should I always be doing this? Do I want everyone to always be doing this, essentially? All right, that's how he would frame the questions and decide his answers, okay? So, like, here's an ethical dilemma. Like, should I catch wild Pokemon and make them part of my team that I will eventually have them fight other Pokemon, all right? So what would Kant say to this? Well, he's a big proponent of the golden rule, right? He's like, I really like individual rights. I do not want to be always forced to do something for somebody else. I don't want to be subservient. And so he would totally be hashtag free all the Pokemon in the Pokemon world. Does that make sense? That's what Kant would think. For sure. He would say, no, I don't think so. We should not always domesticate wild Pokemon. Therefore, nobody should ever be a Pokemon trainer. Okay? That's what he would say. Though, you can still use Kantianism a lot of the time to argue the opposite. It's just, again, there's no right answer. This just gives you firepower. So, like, okay, this kind of gets a little utilitarian at the same time, but then you could also ask the ethical question, like, all right, wouldn't a Pokemon have a better life if I caught it and forced it to fight other Pokemon? Because it would level up. It would essentially, in that universe, become stronger, more healthy, and they'd gain prestige. Like there's little Pokemon resorts that you could go to with your trainers. That's very cute in the anime. Stuff like that you wouldn't get if you were a wild Pokemon, right? You'd probably die earlier, essentially. So that's another ethical question, right? And you could ask that, like, okay, maybe I should always domesticate them because of that. Like I would want to always have the longest possible life I could have. Do you see how I'm using Kantianism to argue the exact opposite right now? That's weird, but useful, okay? It's kind of like a pro-con list. It's very utilitarian, but Kant could ask this question too, like, would I always want to live a better life, to always be healthier? That's in pro of, like, Pokemon now. Interesting, all right? So there's plenty of other ethical questions you could ask, like, should we always use Pokemon, have them fight other Pokemon to, like, fulfill our own, I guess, selfish dreams of like catching every Pokemon and beating every gym leader? Kant, again, for individual freedoms, he would probably say, Absolutely not. I would not want to be used. I would not want to be forced to fight somebody else, right? Because he'd ask the question, should this always happen? Like, think of it if I were in those shoes, okay? And also, we're using them as a means. We're using the Pokemon in that case as a means to an end, right? Our own ends, our own selfish needs. So that's this rule as well. We're bashing there. So that's Kantianism applied to Pokemon. And then there's also the question like, okay, should we try to get rid of, should I use my Pokemon, should I catch Pokemon, have them fight against this evil terrorist group in the Pokemon universe called Team Rocket, and then maybe there is, like, that's more firepower to, like, catching Pokemon and training them, because, like, he might ask the question, like, should we always try to prevent things that are harmful in the world? Like, we want to stop crime? You'd say yes, so like some of these are in conflict with each other, but that's the point, right? This is just a way of looking at the problem. Does that kind of make sense? Are there any questions about how I used Kantianism to talk about Pokemon? See how you could do it. You can go either side. You can talk about the flip side of any question, or the original side, and Kantianism will usually give you some firepower, but you have to figure out like what's best for you. All right? Who knows who's calling me? Sorry. All right, and then if we did the same thing with John Stuart Mill, if we did it with Mill, that's a utilitarian view, right? So what would Mill say when you hear his name or you hear the word utilitarianism? You should think utility, right? Utility. That makes sense. And so, all right, if you're coming back to the idea of should I catch Pokemon, should I make them part of my team, should I be their owner essentially? If you ask that ethical question to a utilitarian, they're going to start weighing things. They're going to make a pro-con list and figure out what's best. What do I gain? What do they lose? And just like average over all of the goodness in the universe, this way or this way. Okay, that's what's going to happen. So again, a utilitarian would like to make a pro-con list right now. Like, okay, what are the cons of like owning Pokemon? Well, they're less free now. They don't get to do what they want. That decreases total utility of the universe, right? But on the flip side, right, if you own Pokemon, they help us rise up in status, and that means they do too, and they also level up. They get stronger, get more healthy. They'll be treated better by people. They'll be put in magazines and go to resorts or something. So there's a weighing going on there. Okay, and that's what a utilitarian would use to come up with their final answer. Like, okay, do the pros outweigh the cons, or do the cons outweigh the pros? If so, I know what I'm arguing now. Okay, does that make sense? So, it's just a silly example. And then finally, last ethical question: should I force Pokemon to fight other Pokemon to level them up? Is that a good thing? Ethical dilemma. A utilitarian would go straight to a pro-con list again. Like, all right, pro of that. It makes the Pokemon healthier. They're going to be stronger and live longer potentially. Con, there might be some trauma involved there, right? On our end and the Pokemon's end at the same time. That's not a good thing. So pro-con list, and you figure out which side wins essentially. Okay, so that's the utilitarian view of the Pokemon world. I have a feeling that both Kant and Mill would be against it, but that's okay because it's just pretend. Any questions? It's fun to think about, though. So pick your favorite ethical question. Pick a video game or something. The universe in that video game. See what Kant would think. Figure out what Mill would think. All right. I think that's all that I want to talk about for ethics for right now. We're going to apply them to some new computer sciencey ideas in a second. But are there any questions just in general with Kant and Mill and those two kind of competing ideas? All right, so I'd like to apply them to something potentially near and dear to our hearts. A computer science topic for sure. Let's talk about piracy, stealing stuff on the internet. And also, let's talk about intellectual property, because that's it's like the backbone of piracy. You're stealing something. You're stealing somebody's intellectual property. That's the word we need to learn if we haven't heard of it. All right, so what I'll try to do for this little subsection of the day is I'll give you some history of piracy on the internet, people stealing stuff. We'll talk about like why in the world is it so hard to stop piracy, because like just like the name sounds bad, like why aren't we stopping that? And then we'll apply our ethical theories too. Okay, so that sounds like a good idea. Some good practice there, something that we understand rather than Pokemon. So let's first talk about intellectual property. It's a weird word, all right? So a piece of intellectual property is something that is like something that somebody made, some creative work that somebody made, but it's not tangible. You cannot touch it. You can't like get out and touch it. So some things that are intellectual property are things like things that you can copyright, like a computer program or a song, stuff like that. You can also patent programs and stuff like that. But again, like it's all in cyberspace. There's nothing like if you're playing a song on Spotify or something. It's not like there's nothing physical about it. It's just ones and zeros inside of a computer. You can trademark things, stuff like that. All right, so it's creative work, and you can steal that stuff, right? You can download a song off the internet, you can download a movie, whatever, stuff like that. Now the question is, what does it mean to steal it then if it's intangible? If this piece of intellectual property is not tangible, like how do you steal it? Because that's very different, right? It's different from stealing something in real life. Should we treat it the same as stealing something in real life? Because like, say you robbed a bank, right? Say you robbed a bank and you walked away with a giant bag of money. The bank no longer has that giant bag of money anymore, right? The bank does not have it. You took it. But in intellectual property, like you're downloading a movie or something, this is not the same anymore, is it? Right? It's not like you're taking something from somebody, you're just making a copy. It's like now there's two bags of money, essentially. Two different things, aren't they? So maybe we shouldn't call it stealing. I don't know. So that's weird. And then you got this, like somebody said, you wouldn't download a car. And like I think that was like an advertisement back in the day to like get people to not want to be pirates and download things illegally. And then the meme answer is like, I would if I could, right? So that's intellectual property. And maybe it's different from stealing. We'll have to talk about that. We'll have to think about it, okay? We'll have to think critically. That's the word. So yeah, let's have a little bit of history of the ways that people stole stuff in the past and in the present, right? So back in the day, probably the original, like, got everybody into it, started the debates on stealing stuff and downloading things. This internet got fast enough, and somebody made a program called Napster. All right, have we heard of that? That's like the original file sharing steal stuff program. Here it is running on a very old version of Mac OS. And so like the idea is you could search, like you're connected to a network where you could search stuff on other people's computer, and it comes up here, and then you can like click it, and then it would download very slowly because this is like 90s internet or something. And like everybody could just share their files on their computer and copy them between each other, essentially. That's what Napster was all about, right? So people could like share what was on their hard drive with other people across the internet, and they could copy stuff onto their own hard drive from other people, right? And so, as you would expect, they enabled intellectual property, like copyright infringement, people stole stuff, and obviously the company behind Napster got sued, at least in the US, and they got shut down in 2001, all right? And so, yeah, this idea of sharing stuff between people, people's computers connecting to other people's computers, it's called peer-to-peer file sharing. Peer-to-peer file sharing. So that's the thing, all right? And that was the main way of stealing stuff. It just depended on the program. So when Napster got shut down, then the new most popular program was called LimeWire. If you've heard of that, you probably were all children. I was a child, or you weren't even born yet. Who knows? So back in the day, the next one was LimeWire. That was the next program. It's again the same thing. Just like now we're on a slightly later version of Windows. It's again the same stuff. You're connected to other people across the internet, their computers. You could search for something and download it slightly faster because the internet has gotten faster now. Okay? That's essentially it. So here's somebody downloading movies or something. Again, peer-to-peer file sharing. And kind of here's what it looks like. You've got your computer on this. You're connecting it to the LimeWire network, essentially. Like, here's your computer. Here's some other people's computers. They were connected to, like, LimeWire's server hub things. And that allowed you to, like, through some path of computers and networks, like, share your stuff with somebody else. Or get their stuff onto your computer, one way or another, right? So that's kind of how the network looked. Like, every computer was connected to each other. You could search other people's files, right? There is a funny anecdote here. The LimeWire company, again, got sued and shut down, 2010 this time. They had a version of LimeWire called LimeWire Pro. that you had to pay for, and it like gave you faster download speeds. You could download the free version of LimeWire and search for LimeWire Pro on it. It was amazing. And then you could steal that, and then you get the faster speeds for free. So that's the ultimate irony, I think. So that was fun. So that was LimeWire. And again, that's not really around anymore. What do I want to say? Yeah, before we get to like present day, how are people sharing files these days and stealing stuff? I just want to tell you that, again, like I showed you with Pokemon, you can use these two ethical theories to argue both sides of the coin here. Like, something's good, something's bad. All right, so like Kant, you could ask Kant, like, is file sharing a good thing? Should people allow their files to be shared? Like, should we be stealing people's intellectual property? You could formulate a question this way, right? You could be like, should you always, right? Because Kant would say always a lot. Should you always like be able to share stuff with people that would potentially otherwise cost money? So that's a question. That's an ethical question. And I feel like if you thought about it enough, you could argue both sides using Kant. So you might be able to say, like, yeah, that's okay. You should be able to share content with people because you can imagine that Kant might say, nothing should ever be copyrighted. Everything should always be free. Like, life would be better. Does that make sense? Like, you could argue that. Like, that is something that Kant might say, and that follows his views. So that's Kantianism saying, yes, you should be able to steal because everything should have just been free anyway. Or you could have Kant saying no at the same time. You could argue that, like, he would probably say no, because if I were an artist, like, I wouldn't want people always taking my stuff and stealing my money, right? Getting from my funds hurts the livelihood of artists, and I wouldn't want to be an artist suffering because people aren't buying my albums and now I can't afford something. Okay? Do you see that there's two sides of the coin there? You can use Kantianism on both. So again, it's just a viewpoint, but the word always comes up a lot. And then you could use Mill again to do the utilitarian side. You could ask these questions like, okay, is this a good thing or not? Should we steal stuff from the internet? And you'd ask the question like, what is going to give the greatest good to the greatest amount? So what's going to make so many people happy, the most people happy, average it over the entire universe? What will provide the most utility? I would say probably, again, you could argue either side, but you probably have a stronger argument going and saying yes with utilitarianism, because just think about all the people in countries where you don't make a lot of money stealing movies and stuff that they never could have afforded, right? Their lives get better, like they're stealing books and stuff like that. They're learning things. There's millions of people who can't even afford an album, for example, and now they're suddenly able to enjoy music. That really, really increases total utility, doesn't it, in the universe? The one artist who's like getting money, not getting as much money, they're just like they're weighed down not very much by the millions of other people who gained from this. Okay. And then also there's the argument that some people, like, they just want to download something to see if they like it. And then they'll give the artist lots of money and go to their concerts if they liked that song. Now they know after they stole it. So that's an argument in favor of stealing using utilitarianism. You could, again, use utilitarianism to say, no, stealing is bad. It's like, you make your pro-con list, and maybe this con wins out. Like, okay, maybe the artists that we love so much and everybody's stealing their album, they're gonna lose so much money, that means they can't make any more music, and they have to go get a day job, and that will make all of their millions of fans so sad, and that will decrease total utility so much that it offsets all the people who are stealing. Does that make sense? That's the kind of thought process you would go through with these ethical dilemmas and these ethical theories, right? But again, you could use it for either side a lot of the time, and it's just like, these are lenses, they're not giving you the right answer, but they're giving you some firepower, right? So whatever side you agree with, you can use those thoughts. Does that make sense? All right, so yeah, just a few more slides left today. Today, the main way, besides like streaming on the internet, like stuff like that people are stealing things is like, if you're going to share files, you use a protocol called BitTorrent. Have we heard of that? It's been around for a while, and the reason you can't really stop it, the reason it's still like alive and well, is that there's no centralization with BitTorrent. There's like little websites where you can search for your illegal files, and those are getting shut down all the time, but new ones pop up, and it's just a cat and mouse game. So BitTorrent will never go away. Also because it's just a protocol. It's a file sharing protocol. And by what that means, protocol is just like it's a way that computers connect to each other. It's like a language that they speak and they use to transfer information. Like when you go to a website, you're connecting to the website with the HTTPS protocol, right? Because all the links start with that. That's just a protocol. There's also one called FTP. Not too popular anymore for file sharing, file transfer protocol. And then BitTorrent is just another one. And so you can make a program that connects to just somebody's computer that can download stuff through this protocol, just like you're connecting to somebody's website. Okay? And so that's kind of why it never goes away. And then also, BitTorrent is just a file sharing protocol. It's used for legit things too. So like here's a screenshot of somebody downloading a Linux distribution, if you've heard of that. It's just a free operating system. And they're just getting faster speeds because they're connected to a bunch of people right now who are sharing the same file. They're not breaking the law at all. This is completely free to download. And like you gain speeds by connecting to a bunch of people at once. Like it's better to use BitTorrent for these things. So BitTorrent has plenty of legal uses as well. Okay, so that's kind of why it's hard to, why it's around. It's not completely bad, and it's definitely hard to like get rid of because it's just you're connecting to a computer. So like somebody can make another computer that you can connect to once the first one gets sued and shut down. All right. Any questions about that? So ethical theories abound. Beautiful. I'll eventually give you some time to talk to each other once more. Let's see here. So here's my next and final, I think, question for you. I'll have you think about this in your peer instruction groups on the next slide. But here's a question that's probably near and dear to your hearts, and it is an ethical dilemma, right? It has to do with piracy. Should you be downloading textbooks from the internet without paying the authors for them? Okay, that is a question that has probably come up in your life by now. So this is good to think about, right? So let's think about like what would Kant say, what would Mill say, what are some common arguments for and against downloading textbooks? Think about those. Like, why would somebody do it? Why would somebody say it's a bad thing? What are the assumptions inherent in those arguments as well? Do you remember those, right? Things that aren't explicitly said but are just part of the sentence, right? They're deep down in there that you have to pick out and maybe bash down. So that's important. So, yeah, this is a fun topic, and I think it's a good example. All right, so what I'd like you to do, please, let me explain it first, then you'll go off. I would like you to get into peer instruction groups with the people sitting next to you, like you were working on the bike-clicker question with. And here is your ethical dilemma. Your question is, should you download textbooks without paying for them? And what I want to do is have a little mini debate. All right, so I'd like you to you can elect a leader. I'd like you to go to the written ice page, please. You can elect a leader to do the submission for you as a group, but what I'd like you to do is I'd like to give you a stance. All right? I'd like to force you to think of this question in a certain way. So what you'll do as a group, you'll elect your leader, and then just start out, and you see how it says group number question mark right now? When you just put your cursor in there, don't type anything, just press submit. Your leader will press submit on a blank submission, and then it will give you a group number. See that? And then you can edit more and submit again. But now that you have a group number as your group, what you'll do is I'm going to say that if you are an odd number or an even number, I want you to think about this question in a certain way. If you're odd, I want you to say yes. If you're even, I want you to say no. So if I were the even group, if I were part of my even group, I would say, my thought would be, no, I should not download textbooks. Does that make sense? I've been given that stance. All right, so based on your number, I'm telling you which way to think. And what I'd like you to do is come up with a couple good arguments in favor of the stance I've just given you for this question. Does that make sense? So if I said, if you're an odd group, you'll give a bunch of reasons why you should be allowed to download textbooks without paying for them, right? If you're in an even group, you're going to give a bunch of reasons for why you shouldn't, right? This is me forcing you to potentially think in a way that you don't agree with, okay? Questions about the question? All right, we got plenty of time. Please go and have some good conversations and record them down on the written ice page with your group, please. Is there a question, please? You're right here. Eventually, I'll have us come back, but just arguments in favor of your stance right now. Here's some good thoughts. Good. A few more minutes. All right. A couple more minutes. Please remember to write down your ideas and press submit. Yes. I'll be able to see your stance though from the evenness or oddness of your group number. Please write down all your stuff and press submit again so that it gets it in there. So I think we could do it in the other order. Nice. Some of us are pressing submit. Actually, I think this would be a good idea to just do it now, and we'll just come back later after we've done this too. But with the arguments that you have just written down and potentially click submit on, I would like you now to, as your group, think of it from the opposite point of view. For every argument that you wrote down, in as much time as I give you, try to bash it down. Pretend that now you change stances. Try to come up with a counter argument for each of your arguments. Does that make sense? Try to bash your own ideas down now. All right, and then you'll submit those too, and then we'll talk about them. I'll give you some more minutes for that.
Along the same.
Yeah, just below the ones that you already wrote. Put like some dashes or something to separate the two. If you want. Argue against yourself. Another minute or so to get your ideas in there. So remember that you're bashing down the ideas that you wrote already, arguing against them. Is that enough time? You all click submit so it actually goes in. It doesn't like auto update it. You have to click the submit button for it to get the new thing. Let's see what we're thinking. Let's see what we're thinking now. So thank you for doing that. Let's see what you guys came up with. We got some even groups and some odd groups. Let's see which group did it right. Looks like group 47's got some stuff. Got some one side and some other side. Some other people might need to press submit still. See how it's auto updating. But nice, somebody, you guys in group 48, you learned how to do the dashes. That's cool. So okay, let's see. If we're in group 47, that means we're odd group saying yes. We said we should download textbooks. They should be free, and we should be able to download is free up until high school. That's a good idea. Yeah, maybe just like knowledge should be free. That's a great argument. Very good. In college, you're paying those fees, so like that should have gone to the textbooks anyway. So that's another good argument. In addition to that, I like it. Already expensive. We don't like money. It's not right. Awesome. And then you bashing down your own idea would be textbooks shouldn't be free and available because like the authors, they need to get paid, otherwise they won't make us nice textbooks ever again. That's how we have textbooks. Like people only wrote them because they needed to make some money, and we won't have any good textbooks ever again, maybe, if we steal them all. So good job, group 47. Let's do one more group. Let's do group 48. So that was an even group, initially saying no, giving some reasons for why we should not steal textbooks. Author doesn't make money, and that's a bad thing. Everybody should always want to make money, right? It's illegal. You can technically get sued for it. That's definitely a good argument. Very good. Everyone else is paying for it, so why shouldn't I? Nice. Like everybody jumping on the bandwagon of like obeying the law. That's a useful argument. Yeah, shouldn't download it, since we may lose it at a certain point in time if it gets deleted. Yeah, that's a good point. Like maybe you want the actual printed textbook, and you only have to buy that one for sure, right? Let's see. And then let's see. Is this where now it starts with the arguments to like 4? Group 48? Is this where it starts for arguments for stuff? I think so. Because now, like, okay, why? It's not worth it because now the author is selling to other people. Like, they're going to make their money anyways. It's not really hurting anybody. Like, those people weren't maybe going to buy the textbook in the first place. Nice, and you're saving money. So good. These are great arguments and counter arguments. And I hope it was a good challenge for you. Like, maybe one of, like, you guys, in your minds, you really think one way. I've just forced you to think the other way for a little bit. And that's going to make you a better critical thinker. All right? Are there any questions, or would any group like to just, like, say something cool that they thought of? Any thoughts? I heard some good discussions, though, so good job. Thank you for that. Back to the slides. So yeah, here's my ideas that I wrote down, if you would like to look at them. Here are my best guesses for like arguments for and against, and then also I thought of it in terms of our ethical theory, so we can tie it back to them one last time. So okay, here's some pros and cons for stealing textbooks, and also the assumptions deep down. Let's talk about those too. So a good argument for stealing textbooks is that the publisher of that textbook is charging way too much money. There's no universe in which it should be $200 for some words, right? So that's an argument for stealing. And then there's an assumption implicitly in that argument, right? At least one assumption is that the publisher of the textbook is actually in control over that price, right? The assumption is that they are extorting us because it shouldn't cost that much for the textbook. But maybe that's an incorrect assumption, right? Because you could have a counter argument and say like, oh, that's not true, because sometimes it costs money to print in color, and like if the textbook is $40, you can't really get around that. That's as cheap as it could be, maybe. All right. So do you see that there's flip sides of all this stuff? There's counter arguments. There's assumptions deep down. An example argument against stealing is that, like, yeah, you should be able to pay the authors of the book for what they wrote. They did a good job in theory, and that's the assumption, right? The assumption, if you're taking this side, is that the authors did do a good job writing the textbook, and we want them to write more and stay in business. I'm sure by now you have read a textbook that is horribly written, right? That doesn't make any sense and is not useful for your learning. That's not maybe a good assumption, right? So maybe that's not true sometimes. So there's give and take there, okay? If we apply this to our ethical theories, you might ask Kant, like, what he would think, and he would ask the question with the word always in it, like, all right, should we always steal textbooks? That's what he would ask, essentially. And you could have him say yes or no, based on his views. You put words in his mouth, but again, it's just a viewpoint. It's a way of approaching the problem to get firepower for yourself. So Kant might say yes, because he might say that, yeah, every piece of knowledge that anybody ever made should always be free. That will help improve humanity, right? Everybody should not be kept in the dark on anything. Knowledge should be free. Learning should be free. Kant might say, let's steal all the textbooks. Let's not even sell them in the first place. On the flip side, you can also use Kantianism to argue the opposite. You could be like, all right, no, if I were an author, right, I wouldn't want to be stolen from. Therefore, no one should ever steal. Does that make sense? So that's the thing. So you get no special exceptions. And that's the way you should always act. So that's Kantianism applied to this. And then utilitarianism, what would Mill say? He'd ask, like, all right, is it good or is it bad? Let's weigh the options, pro-con list. So maybe a utilitarian would say, like, yes, it's a good idea. The pros outweigh the cons because stealing textbooks saves money, increases total utility. There's way more students stealing books than the one author who wrote the thing that's losing money, right? So that's greatest good for the greatest number applied there. So maybe a utilitarian would say that. But at the same time, you could still use utilitarianism to argue the opposite, right? Because maybe you could make the claim that, like, it hurts the author so badly, and this was a really good textbook that is used by every class in this subject. We don't want them to go out of business, right? That would decrease total utility. People would learn less if this textbook wasn't printed anymore. Stuff like that, okay? Because it was just getting stolen too much. Are there any questions about anything that I just said? Because that's what I want you to be able to do one day. Think of counter-arguments, think of the implicit assumptions, apply the theories to the problem at hand. Does that make sense? So yeah, this is a good set of slides to study for sure, I hope. And I think that leads us right on into our next writing assignment, because you had one due. Let's give you a new one so that you have something more to work on, all right? There's always, like, usually a programming assignment out and then a writing assignment out. So here's your next essay. It's going to be a fun one, all right? I've just released it. It's due week 4, so we're in week 2 right now, so it's 2 weeks away from being due. Let's go down to the due date first. February 4th. So that is, boop, boop. This is a little under 2 weeks, 13 days, okay? That's when it's due. And so you got plenty of time. This one is a normal essay, finally. So I'm giving you a real essay assignment. This will be 750 words, all right? So here is your prompt. It's a fun one. Even if you don't agree, here's the prompt that you must follow. You must argue in an essay that college is absolutely useless and not at all worth going to. Why are you here right now? All right? That is what you must argue in the essay. All right? You have to argue that it's true. You probably don't agree since you're sitting in your chair right now, but here I am now forcing you to think about it in the opposite way, potentially. All right, so I'm forcing you to pick this side, that college is useless, not at all worth going to. You have to argue the prompt. I will give you a 0 if you say you disagree at all. Does that make sense? You have to tell me why college is useless. You get that? It's a fun prompt. And so I'm pretty lenient in the way that you want to structure your essay. You can do it however I can read it. Eventually there will be, I will give you some citation requirements, and I will be picky on those, but there's no citation requirement for this essay. I just want to hear your thoughts. So here, you can structure the essay however you want, as long as it's readable. The one thing I want you to really include, in addition to arguing this, is that you have to talk about Kantianism and utilitarianism somewhere in your essay. All right? You have to say those words and explain exactly why Kant would take that viewpoint that you just said he would take. Explain exactly why Mill would take that viewpoint that you're saying he would take towards college. Does that make sense? That's part of your requirements in bold. And you could use it either way. Like, for example, maybe if Kantianism is like, maybe you can get Kant to say, yes, college is useless. If that's true, explain to me why, exactly why Kant would say that, and use it as proof towards your prompt, right? Alternatively, maybe if in your mind, like, you could only get it so that Kant would probably say no and like college after all, Kant would be opposed to my argument, you have to bash down that argument at that point. Does that make sense? Like, whichever side Kantianism would take, either use it to prop yourself up or bash it down, give a counter argument. Okay? Are there questions about that? Because I think that's the full prompt there. You can argue that college is useless. You must argue that it's useless, and you have to talk about both Kantianism and utilitarianism and explain, give explanations. I just don't want you to say Kant would be for college and Mill would be against college. Period. I need explanations, otherwise I won't give you credit for that part. Okay? Any questions? And so 750 words minimum. That is your next essay. We good? Yes. Both sides. What was the second part you said? Oh, no. You could say Kant says yes and here's why, Mill says no and here's why, as long as you mention both sides. You don't have to use them both like I was trying to do. I was just showing you your options. But usually you're going to say Kant is going to say this, and I'm right. He would never say it the other way. Something like that. Right? But if you would like to, you could. That would give you more words to do it that way. As long as you mention Kantianism, explain what he might say at least one way, and then explain why. Okay? Same with Mill. Other questions? All right, we're pretty much out of time, but that is, I think, everything I wanted to say, except for, we got one last minute. Let me talk about style. So in citation issues, I will eventually talk about this. The one thing I want to say in terms of style is you're writing formal essays in this class where you're arguing things, and so I will mark you down if you talk informally during any of your essays. So if you use contractions or you say bro every other word, something like that, then I will mark you down. All right, so that's the last thing that I think I wanted to say. So keep track of the due date. That's your essay. And if you look at the slides, I included a fun little link. There's no time for it, but it's just like weird versions of the trolley problem that you might find enjoyable. You can try that at home if you would like. But I think that's all that I have to say for the day.